and the lead of the Black and Neuro merchandise, and I'm happy to welcome everyone to our seminar series. In this series, we plan to feature neuroscience faculty, neurologists, postdocs, and for today, a graduate student, and we hope to provide a stage for them to share their science, their paths, their setbacks, and their triumphs. And we hope that through this, we can elaborate and celebrate our community and help change the broader community's idea of what a scientist looks like. Some logistics. After the talk ends, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the audience, and you can ask these questions using the Zoom Q&A function. So feel free to share your questions as the speaker is talking, and if you would like to add any tidbits that you hear today to social media, please use the hashtag Black in Neuro Seminar Series. So today our speaker is Shayla Vradenburgh, who grew up in Orlando, Florida, and received her bachelor's in behavioral and cognitive neuroscience from the University of Florida in 2017. She then joined the neuroscience graduate program at the University of Virginia, where she is currently a 6-year PhD candidate studying the impacts of sex on development of the somatic sensory nervous system using single-cell mass spectrometry. After completing her PhD, Shayla hopes to get more involved in mentoring undergrad and graduate students interested in research, as well as helping institutions update and change the support mechanisms and policies in place to assist students as they work toward their advanced degrees. And without further ado, Shayla.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for the introduction. And it's such an honor to receive an invitation to speak today. And so I really greatly appreciate the opportunity. And as you can see from the title of my talk, I'm going to be focusing pretty much exclusively on my journey in science and some of the lessons that I've learned throughout the years. And so for those who don't know yourself, know your worth, kind of the title of my talk, they're these lyrics that are from a rapper, Drake, from one of his songs. And so as I walk through the presentation, I'm going to be kind of using lyrics that Drake has rapped to kind of summarize and highlight different aspects of my journey in science and just personally. So because this talk is a bit unconventional and I am not going to be talking about my science, I thought I'd let you know what I am going to talk about. So pretty much I'm going to kind of walk through just kind of the different stages of my academic journey, which mostly involves undergrad and kind of just how I got interested in research, the time I spent at the University of Florida, as well as the University of New Mexico, and the process kind of for applying to graduate school. For grad school, I'm going to just talk about my experience at the University of Virginia and kind of some of the lessons I've learned so far. And I have yet to be, obviously, a postdoc or a faculty, so I can't really speak to that experience, but I do have thoughts on kind of postdocs and faculty that are working with undergrads and graduate students and kind of just things that they can do to support them. And then I'll kind of just end with talking about kind of some of the things I'm hoping to do next, as well as some of the resources that have kind of helped me get through grad school and acknowledge some of the really great people that have been involved in that. And really kind of the goal of this whole entire presentation is just kind of to speak to people at different stages of science. And for undergrads, I think the message would kind of just be a lot about pursuing your goals. And for grad students, a lot about feeling empowered and recognizing the value of your work. And then for kind of the postdocs and faculty, it's kind of just thinking about the students that you work with and thinking about ways that you can improve their environment and the university's environments to make it more kind of inclusive and supportive for trainees. So with that, I grew up, as was mentioned, in Orlando, Florida, with my mom, my dad, and my older brother. This probably describes how excited my older brother is to have me as a little sister. But, you know, I was kind of a stereotypical nerd when I was a kid. I just loved school. In particular, English and science were my favorite subjects. I loved English because I love reading books. It's pretty much what I spent most of my time doing. But I also just really love science because it just fascinated me, this idea of just people kind of getting to understand how things work and the fact that people had to do things to actually understand that information. And so just the idea of people doing experiments or just simply observing the world they lived in and using that information to kind of inform what's happening, why it's happening, and then eventually even to like help people. I loved all of that. And so pretty much because of this interest and fascination by middle school, I was pretty convinced I wanted to be a scientist. And actually, this is like an article from, it was early high school, but it was an article in the local paper in Orlando talking about how I wanted to be a scientist. So this goal of being a scientist has been around for a while, and it was something I was working towards, but I had no idea what I wanted to study as a scientist, and I had no idea even how to be a scientist. And then when I took AP psychology in my senior year of high school, I discovered like, this is what I want to study. I loved learning about the brain. I loved learning about just the experiments that people did and the way that they were able to understand how we kind of interact with each other, how we interact with ourselves, how we perceive the world. And from that moment on, I knew that I kind of wanted to study psychology. And so after I graduated from high school, I decided to attend the University of Florida for undergrad. And so before you kind of arrive at most universities, and the same at UF, you normally do an orientation where you kind of meet with kind of different people. They teach you a lot about the university, but one of the core goals of the orientation as well is for you to meet with an academic advisor. And that academic advisor will basically be able to help you select a major and then also sign up for your first semester's worth of classes. And so I was there the summer before I started meeting with my academic advisor. And so she asked, like, what do you want your major to be? And very confidently, I said psychology. And then I discovered that UF actually had two different branches of psychology. So there was general psychology, and then there was behavioral and cognitive neuroscience. And so if I'm being completely honest, behavioral and cognitive neuroscience just sounded very, very cool. And it was also still in this realm of psychology that I knew that I liked. So I picked that as my major. And I also still had no idea how to be a scientist. And I did not know what was really required to be a scientist. So for some reason, I had it in my mind that you needed to go to med school. And so I was, part of the pre-med track. There's no like formal kind of major you pick for pre-med. It's mostly just classes that you need to take. And so I had signed up for some of the classes I was going to need, and I was just kind of off on this journey to be a scientist. And then it took about a full semester before someone told me, you do not need to go to med school if you only want to do research. And it was one of the best things I discovered very early on in undergrad. And so pretty much I changed all the courses that I was planning on taking for the spring, and started learning more about just graduate school and kind of the process for getting into graduate school and pursuing that if research was what I really, really wanted. And so now that I kind of had this new path to grad school, one of the things that's really important to do if you're planning on doing a PhD program in particular that's focused around research is do some research while you're in undergrad. And so one of the first research positions I took was relatively simple, but it mostly just kind of involved doing literature searches. And so it was actually for a researcher in the business school, but basically he was looking at the relationship between one of the big 5 personality traits, which was agreeableness, and job performance. And so he needed people to read through a bunch of papers and kind of tell him which were relevant and which were not. So I did that for kind of like a first research position. And honestly, I think it was a really great thing to kind of start with because it gave me a lot of experience just reading through papers. But I also wanted something that was a bit more hands-on. And so for my second research position, I joined the Center for the Study of Emotion and Attention at UF. And I won't go too much into depth in what we studied there just because it takes a bit to explain. But basically, I was able to kind of work with human participants and get to kind of explore more hands-on research from this research position. And like here you can see kind of a picture of me and my lab mate, and we're practicing putting the electrodes on each other that can kind of sense these different physiological properties. But I think the thing with this second research opportunity is that it was really, really great to finally get some kind of like hands-on experience working in research. The problem was that it was basically only focused on kind of the collection step of the research process. And so although it was a really great experience to be able to be a part of that, I really wanted to see things through, past just collecting the data. How do we analyze things? How do we think about questions? How do we think about, ways to move forward? And so because of that, and because I was also about to be a senior, this was like my junior year when I started my second research position, I wanted to go to kind of a different university and just try some different type of research. And so I applied to a few different summer research programs at a bunch of different universities, and I got one at the University of New Mexico. And so my time at the University of New Mexico was one of the most transformative things I ever did for my career. And for any undergrads that might be listening and that are interested in doing research as a career, like I would highly recommend doing a summer research program at a different university if you can. But one of the things about this program that's important to note is that it was not part of the psychology department at UNM. It was part of the biomedical science department. And although neuroscience and psychology have so much that's connected and related, there are definitely differences in particular as well in how you actually do some of the techniques that actually help you do your experiments. And it also typically has a much more biology background for neuroscience that's in the biomedical science department. So while I was there, I was able to actually get a very different experience than the one that I'd had at UF. And I worked with mice. We did electrophysiology recordings and brain slices. And by the end, I was kind of presenting my very first research poster full of negative data. And I was confident that this was the kind of research that I wanted to do. And it was still in this realm of just the brain and understanding it that I loved, but it was just kind of from a different angle. And I really liked that. But also from being there that summer and, talking with my mentor, as well as some of the other graduate students, it also became apparent that some of the skills I had learned for my psychology degree were not the most relevant for this more biology heavy background. And maybe they were still relevant, but there was just definitely some things I was missing. And so pretty much since I was about to be a senior in college at this point, I'd pretty much decided like I'm going to take a couple of years and do a post-bac program. But before I kind of finish this story of my academic journey and kind of talk about how that ends, I thought I'd talk about just personally some of the things that I was doing in undergrad. And so, like most freshmen in college, I did a trillion different things. I was a part of so many clubs, and I played intramural sports, and I volunteered. And it was probably way too many things. But then also by, my sophomore year in college, I actually got a job that was scorekeeping at the school gym for intramural sports games. And I even won scorekeeper of the year in 2016. And I got promoted eventually in that job to a supervisor. And I always love mentioning this job because it was something that was completely unrelated to the kind of career that I wanted to do. But there were actually still so many life lessons I learned from that job. And then on top of that, I enjoyed it. And so just a plug that you don't have to just do things if they're only because they're going to help you for your career per se. But then, on top of kind of working and volunteering and being involved in clubs, I also adopted a cat. And there she is, looking at whoever is taking that picture and asking them to help her. But I mean, overall, I just had an amazing time in college. And I, really loved getting to spend a bunch of time with a lot of my friends. Most of the time that was not at the football games. But I think that honestly, one of the big perks of not being pre-med at the time was I just had so much extra time that I was maybe not anticipating just to be able to spend with people that I loved and cared about and being able to make a bunch of memories that I get to keep forever. So that was a really great period for undergrad. But to kind of finish out my academic journey in undergrad, after New Mexico, I was able to attend a national conference called SACNAS, which was the first scientific conference I had ever attended, and I loved it. And there were a lot of people there, which generally overwhelms me, but it was just such an incredible experience to be around so many great scientists and people. And SACNAS in particular is one of those conferences that really embraces and celebrates diversity. And it was just so great and empowering as a young scientist to just see such a great diversity of people talking about their science and speaking and representing all of that well. Which is similar even just like to the goal of Black in Neuro, but SACNAS was really life-changing for a couple of reasons in particular for me. One was that I met the head of the neuroscience department at a graduate program in Colorado. And he had come to my poster and we had talked for a while about my science, but then also kind of what I was hoping to do afterwards. And he was kind of suggesting, like if you know you want to go to grad school, why would you apply to a postbac? Why not just apply to grad school? And he had a point, but I left that conversation feeling just like I was not ready for grad school. So I was still very much set on my plan to just do my postbac program. But then on the last day of that conference, they had an award ceremony, and I ended up winning an Outstanding Poster Presentation Award, which I just really did not think was going to happen. And honestly, like, I feel like winning that award just gave me this confidence in myself and my abilities. And I thought, maybe I can do this. And so I did. I applied to grad school and just to kind of see how it was going to go. And so I applied to multiple different schools, and I got into the school in Colorado, as well as the University of Virginia, where I ultimately decided to go. So before I kind of jump into talking about my experience in grad school at UVA, there are a couple of things I kind of just took away from undergrad that were lessons I kind of wished I'd learned earlier. And so since Drake has just such a way with words, I'm going to use his lyrics to help me kind of talk about some of the things that I learned. So I'm here for a good time, not a long time. So undergrad can be just such a special and unique time in your life. And it can almost feel like this time that's just going to last forever. And a lot of the time it ends sooner than you think it will, and maybe than you hope it will. But I think although the point of most of the time going to college is to work hard and get your degree so you can kind of work towards your career, it's also really important to spend time doing things that you care about too. And, I can almost guarantee very little of what you learn in the classroom or at the library are going to be the things you remember from undergrad. I'm just feeling like the throne is for the taking. Watch me take it. So I really love what this phrase, just because it feels so empowering. But I also feel like at the end of undergrad, it really felt like there was just this world of opportunity and possibility. And I was excited to really start down this path towards a goal that I'd had since I was little. But at the same time, it's a lot to deal with all at once. So, I was leaving the only state I'd lived in. I was leaving all of my friends from college, as well as even some from high school that were still back home in Orlando. I was leaving my family. I was moving to a new state that I had never been in, to a city I didn't know anyone in. And that's just a lot to have to deal with. And I just remember there were moments of just like, is this what I want to do? I don't know if I want to move anymore. I just don't know if I can do this. And although I think that it still was important for me personally just to push myself and to start, I also kind of wish I would have given myself more permission to just realize like it's okay to start down a path and then realize that's not the path you want to take anymore. And I feel like especially when you're kind of in that college kind of age range, it's like there's like almost like this lie that is told and kind of perpetuated that when you're 18, you need to pick what you're going to do for the rest of your life, and hopefully you'll pick correctly. And that's just not true. Like there are many ways to kind of change paths and directions and do things that align more with who you are as you grow up. And then for the last kind of take-home message, tell the young high school kids, keep dreaming, because they sure do come true. So this just made me reflect on how middle school Shayla was, wanted to be a scientist. And now college graduate Shayla was on the path to making that happen. And so although, the way that I kind of got into biomedical science and studying neuroscience was maybe not the most direct and definitely doesn't look a lot like the paths that some of the other people have taken, like it didn't matter. Like I'm still here. And, there's many different paths to whatever dreams you have. And in particular for science, you can gain more experience many different ways. So I had mentioned, I was thinking of doing a postbac program. So that's an option, or doing a lab tech position. If you think you need more classes, you could get a master's degree. And so pretty much the, take home message from all of that is just like, if you want to achieve something, you can find a way to make it happen. So on to grad school. So I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia in the summer of 2017. And if anyone remembers what was happening in Charlottesville, Virginia in the summer of 2017, that it was a particularly hard time to be a Black student at UVA and a Black person in Charlottesville. And then if you add on top of that, the fact that I am brand new to the city and I did not have very much community. And on top of that, there's a bunch of imposter syndrome of just a lot of grad students feel when they start. And so overall, it was a very hard time. But I persevered. I selected a lab in the spring of 2018. And even though I was still very much lost, I basically had told myself, I'm going to stay in this program until someone literally kicks me out. And so if they don't literally kick me out, I'm just going to stay and we're just going to see what happens. And honestly, I was doing pretty well in retrospect. So I was able to win an internal award. And then I also got selected for the biotechnology training grant, which is a training grant that really is for people who are interested in kind of industry, which is a direction I was thinking of going. And so as part of the biotechnology training grant, one of the things you need to do is do an internship at a biotech company. And so I did do that in the summer of 2019 in San Francisco. And so the company I worked for was called Denali. And I loved working there. I think that the environment in industry is can definitely be a bit different than academia, and all environments have their pros and cons. But I think that particularly for me, the environment in industry just felt like something I enjoyed. And Denali in particular just had a really great atmosphere and some really great people. And so while I was there, I really got to get this really great experience, almost like tasting what it would be like to work for an industry company while I'm still in grad school. And also being able to network and meet people that can help me achieve that potentially one day. And so pretty much at the end of this experience kind of solidified, like I would really like to go into industry kind of after graduating. But before I kind of finish out kind of where I'm going on my academic journey, I'm jump into the personal side again and highlight some of the personal things that were going on in my life in grad school. And so obviously it was very difficult to move to a brand new place and then have no close friends and then have the events of 2017 happen. But I did eventually make some really great friends, and I joined a lab, and I love my lab mates, and they are some of the kindest and most supportive and helpful people I know. And especially those first few years, I needed a lot of help. But pretty shortly after I had joined the lab, I was playing an intramural hockey game and I badly broke my finger. And it's actually like a little bit of a funny story, not exactly the funniest, but one of my friends who was there, he had offered to take me to the emergency room, and he was like, I'll take you, nothing else is open, but I kind of feel like it's just dislocated. And so I went to go talk to the ER doctor, and I was like, yeah, I bet it's just dislocated. He's like, we'll take some x-rays anyway. And so he took some x-rays and they came back, and he said, I've never seen anything like this before, which are not the words you want your doctor to say. So as you can see, it was a pretty bad break. And so it ended up requiring me to have surgery. And they couldn't schedule the surgery until about a month after I'd broken my finger. And the doctor was basically giving me two different options. He's like, you could do a surgery with a 4-week recovery time or surgery with a 6-week recovery time. I selected the 4-week recovery time. And I want to emphasize here that no one ever told me or explicitly pressured me or anything to make the decision to take the surgery with a shorter recovery time. That was fully my decision. But I feel like a lot of us can probably relate, though, to just this pressure that you're always behind. And I know at that time in my life, I had felt like I had just joined this lab. I had nothing to show for my time there. And I already couldn't work for a month leading up to my surgery. And it just felt like it was going to be so much longer to wait. And now I can't bend my finger all the way. So that did not work out well for me. And I mean, looking back, it honestly feels like somewhat idiotic that I wouldn't have just gotten the other surgery. Like, it's 2 weeks of my life. But I think it just can be so easy in grad school to look around and feel like you need to get more done and you need to be working more. And if you don't, you're behind or you don't belong here. So after all the stuff with my finger, I eventually relearned how to do my experiments and kind of was working on some of that. And I also qualified. And then I ended up going to San Francisco to do my internship at Denali. And although I did love working at Denali, I think being across the country by myself was just like a really tough experience. But regardless, I finished my internship. I moved back to Charlottesville kind of at the end of 2019. And I pretty much had spent a bunch of time kind of figuring out, these are all the experiments I need to do. I had planned everything. I had troubleshooted some stuff. I was ready to kind of go. And then COVID hit. And so I first want to say it's not an exaggeration that the pandemic was a hard time for everyone. And there are varying degrees of hard, but it was across the board a difficult time. But kind of in the midst of this very difficult time, I did have just a couple of good things come out of that pandemic for me personally. And so one was I got to spend some time just kind of resting and relaxing. And although we were still working and kind of meeting virtually, I really hadn't collected like enough data at that point to be working too hard. So I just really had some time to kind of take up some new hobbies and just hang out with my then boyfriend. And just kind of think about the person I am and the person I wanted to be. And then also during that pandemic, I married that then boyfriend. And so that was just really great to kind of get to celebrate. And we ended up getting to celebrate twice and spend a bunch of time with both of our families and think about, starting our lives together. And, I think the combination of just time and rest and the ability to reflect and also, having extra time to do a lot of reading on my projects and missing kind of interacting with my lab mates and just the sense of purpose that research gave me. I feel like I left that pandemic and I emerged as not only just like a stronger person, but a stronger scientist. And so kind of to jump back in to grad school and kind of the journey for that. And the middle of grad school can be just a really tough time. It's like you feel like you're doing so many things and there's not as much as you would hope to show for it sometimes. And, I think it's already tough to just be kind of in the middle of anything. But most of the time, you were doing a lot of work and half the experiments aren't working and, it's taking longer than you thought it would. And now, you still need to kind of get enough data together to put in a paper to send somewhere. But regardless, when I got back from Denali, I was able to kind of work with a lot of my lab mates and co-author a couple of papers. And then I spent a lot of time just collecting data on my own for my own project. And so just this past summer, I kind of started working more intensely on publishing my own first author paper. And as my mentor and I were working on this paper, conflict between us grew to the point where I was just considering quitting my PhD program as a 6th-year grad student. And from a personal standpoint, going through this conflict with my mentor was hard. I felt like it had already taken me a really long time to gain scientific confidence, and now it felt like it was being cut down. And ultimately, I decided I was going to stay in the program, and I recently submitted the paper that I was working on, which is great. But I think that this experience has highlighted for me just some of the flaws in academia and the culture that exists here. And so, I want to preface this statement by saying, like, I have multiple faculty members, postdocs, graduate students, undergrads that have just been so supportive and have really done more than they should ever have to do to just, help me and help me try to graduate. And when I'm speaking broadly about academia or faculty, I just want to, make it clear that I don't mean literally everyone in those spaces. But the reality is that the academia was not designed originally for people like me, in its most original form. It was designed by specific people to honestly exclude people like me. And although practically every institution wants to improve their environment and, they want to make it more diverse and they want to make it more inclusive, the progress is slow and the environment isn't all that great a lot of the time for a lot of the people in it, especially from underrepresented groups in science right now. And so the academic system, again, was originally just designed by and for specific groups of people. And, although the system makes me upset, I think that there's still hope. And I think although there is still hope, there's just a lot of work that just needs to get done. And, I think that's also why platforms like Black in Neuro are just so important because, a lot of the people that were left out of the original conversations at the beginning of science as a career, we get to have some platform and a voice now and get to talk about the things that, we experience and feel. And at the very least, we get to make PowerPoints with Drake lyrics that highlight the need for change. So speaking of Drake, here are just some of the lyrics that kind of sum up my experience in grad school and some of the things that I kind of thought about and lessons I've learned. Their opinion doesn't count. We're the only thing that matters. So it's so easy to compare in grad school and just feel inadequate when you look around. And if you learn any lesson from me and my messed up finger, I hope it's that, you do what's best for you. And sometimes what's best for you is not working in the lab. And, at the end of the day, science and grad school are always going to be there. So if you need to take a break, take a break. I also think, there are some times that you'll meet people that are just particularly harsh or critical. And it's really easy to just internalize a lot of the things that they're saying about you. But I think an important thing to note is that a lot of the time, the people that tend to be the most critical, they don't know you. And, they've got a lot to say, but they don't know who you are. Their opinion does not count. But I know you need to get done. So obviously the goal is graduation. And I think it can be so tempting to just work yourself to death, just trying to finish things as fast as possible. And, I think it's not a secret that grad school is hard, but as a reminder, grad school is hard and there's a lot of ups and there's downs. And, it can be tempting to just try to race through it. And, running the race as fast as possible is, good in some regard. But running at a conversational pace, as my husband would say, just makes the experience more pleasant, and hopefully won't be passed out at the end, and you won't be burnt out at the end. I got a really big team. So there's this really great quote from an organization I really love called To Write Love in Her Arms. The founder, his name is Jamie Tarkowski. One of his quotes is, "People need other people." And I just always love this as a reminder that it's like, we all need other people and we all need support and we all need people to be there for us. And I think if there's a time where that is especially true, it's grad school. And so for kind of the grad students that are listening, I would just really encourage you to just connect with other grad students and get support with them and have them kind of help as well as you kind of go on this journey. But also find faculty that are not just your mentor, and find other staff that are in your department, outside of your department, in a different college, even, just to help support you as you work towards your degree. And then also, obviously, working towards the degree is something that's incredibly important that you need to be doing, but there's life outside of science. And, having friends and family that support you outside of grad school is also incredibly important. And then I'm just saying, you could do better. Tell me, have you heard that lately? And for that moment, when I was considering I was going to be quitting my program, I just found a great freedom in realizing, like, I don't need a PhD to be a good person. I don't need a PhD to be successful. I don't need a PhD to be happy. And, I think those are words you very infrequently hear as a grad student. So if you are in a PhD program or starting a PhD program and you're just realizing, like, this is not something you enjoy, or this is not something you like, or the environment is not great, or it's just not worth it, like, it's okay to leave. You will be okay. And if you're struggling with some of the opinions and attitudes that kind of exist within academia, just know, like, you deserve to be in a place where you are valued and appreciated, and no one should be forced to pick between being respected or being disrespected in their dreams. So just something to keep in mind. So again, for kind of the postdocs and faculty, I have never been a postdoc or a faculty, and so I can't speak to your experience. But I do have just thoughts if you are working with undergrads and grad students in some ways that you could support them. And yeah, I will also preface this by saying, like, I don't want this to come across as critical, and obviously it's going to just be a lot of my thoughts and ideas, and lined up, they feel a bit critical maybe, but I think the important thing to note is just, like, these are just suggestions and things maybe to keep in mind sometimes. But one of the first kind of thoughts is, I need acknowledgement. If I got it, then tell me I got it then. So critiques are so important for progress and necessary for growth, but so is praise. And especially for students that are new to working in a lab, or even if they have worked in a lab, every lab environment is different. Sometimes the expectations are different. And it just always feels really great to get some kind of feedback that you are doing the right thing, or you're doing this well. And it means a lot of the time. I want to do the things that I mentioned. So I think sometimes it can be easy kind of just to, like, say things that people maybe want to hear, or, like, also just agree to too many things. And I guess I would just say, like, you say you're going to read a paper, read the paper. If you say you're going to teach an experiment, teach an experiment, or, just if you say you're going to support somebody, support somebody. Like, I guess it's kind of an obvious statement, but I think like the idea is just, although communication is really great, it means much more when you actually follow through. And obviously things come up and, things happen, but I think, communication is just really important. And also just remembering how hard it was like as a student. And especially when you really can't do these things on your own, and so you need other people's help and you need their input. And so it always kind of hurts when you feel like it's not prioritized for them. So maybe just something to also keep in mind. Last name ever, first name greatest. So I think it can be easy sometimes just to forget the value of other people's time. And this is something I think that happens across all, like the entire scientific and academic hierarchy. And I mean, I know I am guilty of this myself. And I, when I was working with undergrads in the lab, I would like abruptly cancel meetings, or I'd kind of change the schedules on them kind of on a whim. If I said we were reading a journal club paper, but I didn't get to it, we're just not doing it anymore. And, although I think there are some maybe differences in the levels of flexibility that different academic stages, I guess, have to have, I don't think that the importance of people and their time is dependent on their place in that hierarchy. And sometimes I think it's important to keep that in mind and remember that. I don't know how to talk to you. I don't know how to be there when you need me. And I really do think that like most faculty and even postdocs, you really care about your students and you really want to help them and support them, but it's very hard to support someone you don't know. And although that doesn't mean you need to like be forcing people to tell you their whole life story, I think that, if you're more willing to kind of be honest and ask them how they're doing and talk to them about their lives and especially their lives outside of science, it means a lot and it shows them that you care and they matter. And then also, it's important to recognize that science is not everything. And, I think there's this perception or description of science as kind of not emotional and there's no feelings. And I think to some degree that is true, but I think the emotions and feelings do exist in the people doing the science. And when we start prioritizing the science and not the people doing it, it can just kind of create a lot of problems. But then also like this can be a two-way street if you want it to be. And, life happens to everybody. And when you fostered an environment that kind of promotes respect and support, you can also tap into that and rely even on your students or postdocs or other staff to kind of help when you need it as well. But kind of to really get like the best benefits of that, you need to be more than just a scientist, the people you work with. The furthest thing from perfect, like everyone I know. So like I mentioned, although this slide might come across maybe a bit critical, like the reality is that no undergrad, no grad student, no postdoc, no faculty, no staff member, like no one is perfect. And we all make mistakes and we all do things that we would like to take back or wish we could. And so after we make mistakes, I just think it's important that we recognize it, we own up to it, and we do better next time. So kind of just to start wrapping up, I just thought I'd mention kind of what I'm planning right now for my future. And first things first, I just need to graduate. But then, I also just think I needed a break from working at the bench. And so the subtitle of my talk is like slightly misleading because, I am planning on leaving science at the bench for some time, but I don't know how long. And I imagine I'll probably be back. But in the meantime, I'm also just going to plan on living my life. And all the pictures kind of on the screen were taken after the conflict with my mentor. And, I in this kind of entire talk, a lot of it's honestly kind of a highlight reel. And there's so much of my life that I did not talk about that is much harder and darker and more difficult. But hopefully one thing that this presentation also gets across is, even in the midst of some very dark times and dark seasons, there are things to smile about and people to smile about it with. So to circle back to the title of my talk, Know Yourself, Know Your Worth, I just feel like my whole journey in science has been at its core about, figuring out who I am, figuring out what I like, figuring out what my priorities are, and then recognizing my strengths and my values as a person and as a scientist. And the beauty of this message is that it's not just for me. It is for undergrads and grad students and postdocs and faculty and everybody. So that's pretty much it for like most of my talk, but I thought I would just end by talking about a few different resources that kind of gotten me through grad school. One is this podcast called Hello PhD. I really, really love it. It's got just a bunch of different resources of like a bunch of episodes about practically every area related to grad school. In particular, episode 136, Rebuilding an Inclusive Academia by Dr. Shayla Vradenburgh, I really loved. It actually talks a bit about some of the things I talked about and just the structure of academia and how it is not exactly designed for everybody. It's one of my favorite episodes, but overall, I really love that podcast. The second kind of resource here is To Write Love on Her Arms. That is the organization where I had a quote earlier from the founder, Jamie Twarkowski, but it focuses a lot on mental health. And obviously mental health is a thing that a lot of graduate students and people in general struggle with. And so it has a lot of really great resources, as well as just some blogs that are really nice to look at. The other kind of resource here is Todoist. It's a to-do list app that I have fallen in love with, and it just has a really great way of being able to organize some of your different tasks. So I use it all the time. SciWheel is a reference manager. So for kind of just all the different papers and stuff that you're looking at, it's really nice because you can also separate things by different projects. And it also links to Google Docs so that you can actually format your references in Google Docs, which is fantastic. And the last one I've included on here is Spotify. And so I think lots of people probably got their Spotify Wrapped kind of like stories recently. But I just tend to listen to tons of music while I do practically everything. And so I've kind of made a little code here that you can scan if you'd like, that actually has all of the songs that I took lyrics from for this presentation. I will preface this by saying that these are not the clean versions of the songs, and these are the kinds of music that you maybe listen to in your headphones while you do your experiments, and not for the whole lab to hear. And if you did not like rap music before this presentation, you will not like it after. So just keep those things in mind. And then lastly, I included my email address down below here. And, I feel like I just kind of stumbled my way through undergrad and grad school with little guidance. And part of that was just not knowing like who to talk to and who to get help from when I was struggling with things. So I've included it here, and I am willing to talk and chat about anything that anyone feels like talking about. So I'm going to very, very briefly do acknowledgments, and then I'll return to the slide if people need more time to scan the code. But I just wanted to briefly thank just like so many people in my life that have just been supportive of me through this entire journey, including my parents that have been there literally from the beginning. And, my husband, who's been really great, my lab, who I just absolutely adore, and all of my friends and my cat. And so there's just even people not on this slide that have just been so helpful and kind, and that I really appreciate. So with that, I will return to this in case people need more time to scan the code or copy my email address. But with that, I will take any questions.
Wow, Shayla, that was such an amazing talk. Really inspirational, honestly. And I really loved and appreciated the way that you kind of talked about how we're people outside of lab. I guess I'm wondering how you found yourself outside of lab, especially in this time where, in grad school, where there's just this pressure to like go, go, go.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it took me a very long time. But I think that I just started, especially during the pandemic, I couldn't really go to lab. And so I just had to figure out like, what are things that I like to do that don't involve being in the lab? And I randomly decided, I was like looking at pictures on Pinterest or something. And I was like, oh, this like really cool woodworking thing seems cool. I've never done woodworking, but I'll try it. And I ended up really liking that. So I was doing like woodworking. I kind of got back into some of the old hobbies that I enjoyed doing. And then it also though, like highlighted some of the things in my life that I really loved that involved other people. And so one of those is basketball. I've always just really loved playing basketball. And so trying to get more involved in intramural sports there, and also just even trying to ref some if I can. So I think a lot of it was just like having the time, honestly, just to like have nothing else to do, helped me determine what I like to do outside of lab and who I like to do it with.
That's awesome. Another follow-up question would be, you mentioned your biotech internship, and I feel like academia or grad students are kind of moving toward trying to, feel less pressure and staying in academia and branching out. And I'm wondering if you had any pushback from your PI to take the summers to like do these internships, and if you have any advice for people that are kind of like trying to navigate that now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did not have any pushback from my PI, and he was incredibly supportive of this. He actually introduced me to the people who worked at that company. He knew some of them from some of his previous experiences. So he was actually a very good resource for that. And then I think the really nice thing about the training grant that I was on is that it was a requirement. So honestly, even if my mentor wasn't like happy about it, he had to let me go do the internship. So if there are kind of those kinds of training grants at universities that some of these other grad students are at, like it would be probably a good thing to look at if it's something you're really interested in doing. And I guess my other thought would just be, I think it's really tricky because you still need to maintain good relationships with people, and you don't want to do things that are, selfish or, I don't know, somehow hindering your relationship or something with your mentor. But also, part of it is about being a little selfish. And, if industry is something you really want to explore, maybe having just a very honest conversation with your PI, and being like, I really want to do this. I would like to take this amount of time. And just really explore this kind of different area. And hopefully they'll be supportive of that.
That's really great advice. It's so great that your school has, or institution has, this program. I haven't heard of things like that before. So that's like really awesome, and something that I think institutions can kind of like take note of this like program and how you've benefited from it.
Yeah. And I think there is a website that they have affiliated with UVA, like on like a UVA BTP is normally what it's called. And they have just all of the people who have been involved in the program, as well as some of the resources they have there as well. So if people wanted to look more into it.
Awesome. Well, I don't think we have any more questions, but I really want to thank you for your talk. I really loved the Drake and like music edition. I feel like that was like very cool, and I hadn't seen something like that before. Oh, actually, we have another question. Hi, Shayla. Really enjoyed your talk. Do you have any suggestions for how programs can better support students?
Yes. So I have many ideas, and some of them are probably more feasible than others. But I think that there's one thing is that I think sometimes the burden is placed a lot on the students to, figure out how to find all these levels of support and figure out how to just do grad school. And I think that honestly, a lot of institutions should have some of these things just already built in. And so, one of the things I was involved with is like, it's called the Mentoring Institute. And so it's basically another faculty member that's not my faculty member that I get to meet with regularly. And that was really great for me, but that's not exactly available for all of the students. And even still, like it would just be a really great resource to kind of have that set up. Also, even simpler things like, most people have committees for their, thesis project, and just requiring the chair of your committee to meet with that student by themselves before, like maybe, on a somewhat of a regular basis, just to check in without their mentor around. Also, just like providing ways that students can kind of interact and meet each other. I know, like for me, like there are definitely some students that I met, and they've been so great. Like they've been incredible resources, but it also was not, they were not around from the beginning, or I wouldn't have known to reach out to them. It's more like, we happened upon each other by chance, or, there were like mentorship programs that were established, but, a lot of it is kind of just like random pairing. And sometimes that doesn't create the best fits. So I have a ton of ideas. Honestly, I won't ramble too long, but I honestly, you're welcome to also email me and I can share some more I have as well.
That's a great tip. So we have one more question from Keita Adams. As someone who just finished applying to PhD programs, what do you think are some important questions to ask potential faculty members in regards to support building community and curating a strong mentorship relationship in the beginning? How important is it to reach out to current graduate students in the program I'm interested in?
Yeah, so those are really great questions. I might answer the second one first. So I think it is incredibly important to reach out to some of the current graduate program or graduate students that are in the program you're interested in, as well as the lab that you're interested in. I think that most of the time, like grad students, they will gladly tell you kind of like what their experiences have been. And, I think most of the grad students I've experienced have mostly just been interested in helping, the younger students that are kind of following them. So overall, I think that it's not going to hurt you in any sense to reach out, and they can provide you with a lot of valuable feedback that is sometimes not readily apparent. But then in terms of just things you can ask your mentor, and especially as you're kind of rotating and figuring out different labs you want to be involved in. I mean, I think that it's sometimes a little tricky. I feel like there's a lot of things, honestly, you probably could ask. But I guess I probably would say some of the biggest things are honestly not the things that you maybe even would ask your mentor. I feel like it's honestly, a lot of it is just seeing kind of what the environment is and seeing also what the grad students and other people in the space have to say. But if you are, asking your mentor questions, I think some of it is also you kind of describing what you're interested in and seeing what they think about some of those things, or if you have, research or like mentorship in interests or outreach interests, making those apparent and asking if they know about different things that are kind of already in the works at the university. Sometimes that can also kind of give you somewhat of a gauge on how involved they are with some of those kind of different aspects of the things that you find really important. But I think in terms of just also having a really great mentorship relationship, I think from the beginning, it's really great just to establish like what the expectations are. And it's really tricky because there can be lots of expectations for lots of different things. But maybe just making it, like having much more honest and open conversations from the beginning of, well, what does it look like, like when we're working on this paper, and, what are your expectations for how many hours I'm in lab, and what are your expectations about vacation? And, I guess the hope would maybe be that they've kind of even have some of this already ready to go to share with people. But even if they don't, just figuring out what you find the most important and kind of asking them what they think about some of those things.
Yeah, it sounds like you're kind of saying the line, keeping the line of communication open is like super key, especially with your PI. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we would like to thank you, Shayla. It was an amazing talk. And if any of the audience has any follow-up questions for Shayla, you can reach out to her in her email provided here. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much.